We'll talk about some recent viewings we've locked for defenders for the 2024 NHL Draft on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be reviewing our recent viewings of some 2024 NHL Draft defensemen. We'll talk about players that are going to be available in the first or second round for your teams, what kind of styles they play, what we've liked from them in recent viewings, and just overall our kind of evaluation of how they've been trending recently. We'll get into the names and the size and the handedness and the styles of play later on. Just to name a couple players we'll discuss: Harrison Brunicky, Carter Yakemchuk, Artyom Levshunov, who that's one player you've probably heard of. We'll talk about some Europeans as well. It's going to be a really interesting episode. But before I get into it, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day and leave a rate and review. It helps the channel out a lot. So let's get right into it here. I think we can start off with a pair of, there's going to be two pairs here that we can discuss in detail that are, pretty comparable and for both of us kind of in the same range. I want you to start off here with Leon Muggli versus Daniil Ustinov. Talk me through their profiles, how they play, and which one you like more of the two.
For sure. These are the two Swiss draft-eligible defensemen that are quite interesting. Both of them played decent roles for the Swiss team at the World Junior Championship a month ago. And while it was a difficult performance for that team and neither player blew the lights out at the tournament, I thought that Daniil Ustinov kind of cemented himself as the higher upside bet between the two players. Ustinov is a 6 foot, 183-pound left shot defenseman. He's quite young for the draft class, as he is a July or August birthday, and he's quite interesting. He's a decent skater, potent in transition with the puck on his stick. He can solve problems really effectively when they're in front of him on the ice. Consistently tries to get the pucks to his more dynamic forwards and can delay with the puck when he's under pressure to wait for an opening. He's quite interesting in transition, but his defensive zone and offensive zone games are still a little bit more of works in progress, and that's where Leon Muggli shines a lot more. He's a lot more refined than Ustinov is. His toolkit isn't as good. He is not as fluid a skater, as powerful a skater, as good a handler as Ustinov is. His offensive instincts aren't as flashy. Ustinov kind of keeps himself he's very restrained in terms of the risks he takes offensively, but when he does take the risks, they're awesome, and he can really create some things offensively. With Leon Muggli, it's a lot more simplistic and bare bones, but in a pretty projectable way. He is a little bit undersized defenseman at 6 feet, 159 pounds, also quite young for the draft class with a July birthday. And he's been playing much more minutes in a bigger role in Switzerland, playing with Zug. And he has been very interesting. The production's been excellent with him, but a lot of it's just coming off of point shots and secondary assists. He's not necessarily a massive offensive driver, but he is an offensive facilitator. A lot of the play flows through him, and he's a conductor of play. And he tries to maintain possession. He takes the simple plays, makes the simple passes when he needs to. On retrievals, he's very effective at lowering his center of gravity to out-leverage much bigger and heavier opponents. So he's quite effective in board battles compared to other players of his stature, especially playing in pro leagues. So he's been interesting, but with him, I definitely have some question marks about the high-end upside,
Yeah.
which is why I currently have Ustinov ranked a couple slots above them, above Muggli, but there's literally one player separating the two of them, and it's a pretty fun one in Cole Hudson in my rankings.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you say that because I have them in different tiers. I have Danilo Stinkov at 51st and I have Leon Muggli at 62nd. And I think it's just really a stylistic thing. Like obviously Muggli right now is a lot more refined, even though he's just a month younger, a month older than Danilo Stinkov. I mean, they're both left-handed defensemen, similarly sized, but they play such different play styles and are at such different points in their projection.
For sure.
I think Ustinkov's room for improvement is a lot like his runway's a lot longer than Leon Mugli's. With Muggli, what you're seeing right now is more or less what you get, which is pretty good. Like he's good at lowering
Yeah.
his body, like winning battles against like former NHLers in the Swiss national League. Like there are some really good quality players that usually be playing in the KHL or the SHL, but the Swiss National League's been offering a lot to players recently. So a lot of former NHLers have been migrating to that league, right? And with Mugli, I feel like there's not much room for improvement. You might add a couple pounds, get up to like 185, 190 pounds, but other than that, like the play style is pretty set in stone. Whereas a Stinkov, there's so much he can add to his game, given how much he's exploring, how much he's taking risks, and like the different ways that he's been molding his play. So they're two really interesting Swiss players who, I mean, both of them are probably going to be available in like the 35 to 50 range, I would say. Mugli's probably going to go first, given how teams usually draft, but I think
Yeah.
Ustinkov's definitely worth a bet. But that brings me to another two players that are pretty comparable. We have Carter Yakemchuk and Harrison Brunicky. Yakemchuk is almost definitely going to be a top 20 pick, but I don't really see that with Yakemchuk. He's a very risky, big right-handed defenseman. His forward skating is really interesting because it's really good, but it's really most of what he does is because he's activating offensively so often, because he's trying to stick handle through players so often. Um, he's refined his forward skating to a point where he's able to do these things fairly well. But the lateral mobility and the backwards mobility are a bit more struggling. And it's mainly because he's not putting himself consistently in situations where he has to use those. Oftentimes, what he'll do is he'll skate forward with the puck through the neutral zone, try to dangle through a player at the offensive blue line, try to drop the shoulder, drive the net type thing. And when that doesn't work out, he's skating forward back towards his own zone. So he's never really using his lateral or backward skating, which makes it a bit more difficult for him to utilize those tools and improve them because he's not really seeing as much reps, right? But with Yakimchuk, the upside is ridiculous because he has a booming shot. He's got fantastic hands, a lot of creativity. And overall, like the passing's really good as well. There's a lot to love about his offensive game, right? But there are big struggles with his defense. He doesn't really focus on it as much to begin with. And on top of it, the decision making is kind of rough. Whereas with Harrison Brunicky, who's also a right handed defenseman, with similar size to Yakimchuk, but I mean, Yakimchuk's over a point per game right now in the WHL, and Brunicky has 19 and 43 games. So, like, if you
Yeah.
look at the stat lines, there's a big gap. But for me, Brunicky is just so projectable. Um, he's a player who, like, I feel like sometimes he's a complete opposite of Yakimchuk, where the tools are still really, really good. Like, you'll pull off a deke, a stick handle in transition that'll really, really surprise you. But overall, he keeps the play in front of him. He makes really smart reads, really smart decisions with the puck and without it. The gap control is really good. The footwork is really good. And he's pretty aggressive as well. Like he's a big guy who plays big. Like he's able to drop the shoulder, drop the gloves, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think we've both logged viewings for each other's kind of comparable
For
players.
sure.
What do you think about Yakimchuk and Brunicky overall in terms of play style? Like, how would you compare them?
Oof. I mean, Brunicky, I enjoy more to watch, even though, like as you mentioned, the production isn't anywhere near Yakimchuk's.
Yeah,
The handling skill that Brunicky just casually flashes, like in every situation when it's applicable, is wild to me. Like
yeah,
he's very, very effective at applying his tools to solve complex problems. And with Yakimchuk, there's a lot more chaos and dare to his game, where he's pushing his own limits, but also perhaps not always scanning around and trying to apply the right thing for the situation. So
Yeah.
I find Brunicky a lot more cerebral with the puck on his stick than Yakemchuk is, but Yakemchuk is just pure dare, and you gotta respect that as well. Like, he just tries things and he's learning on the fly, and
Yeah.
it's chaotic and frustrating to watch from a scouting or coaching perspective, but is certainly a fun way of kind of developing like tools, especially offensively. And
Yeah.
while the defensive game for Yakimchuk certainly has a ways to go, uh, he's entertaining as anything, and I'm sure
Yeah.
Calgary Hitmen fans absolutely adore the guy.
Absolutely, yeah. I still got a soft spot for Brunicky, also because he could become the first South African national to get drafted in the NHL draft. He has dual nationality between Canada and South Africa, which is really interesting. And yeah, I think the game that he brings is really particularly alluring, and you could be looking at a do-it-all two-way defenseman who can just get involved in every scenario and constantly analytically outperform his peers, which is really difficult to find. I
Mhm.
think second pair is the upside, though. But that wraps things up for our first segment about some comparable defensemen. We'll get into some more after after these messages from our sponsors. Here, we're going to be talking about Alfons Freij, Leo Sahlin, Wallenius, Charlie Elick, and Tarin Smith. After these messages from our sponsors over at Indeed. We're driven at Locked On by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. You don't search, you match with Indeed. If you need to hire, Indeed is the best place to do that. It's a great matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. As an employee, I really liked Indeed when I went for my job search at my day job there. It's really user friendly, really useful in terms of finding the things that you're good at and matching it with job offers that match those qualities. And overall, it's just a fast way to make sure that you get the right job. And there's no secrets or surprises. 99% of the time, the salary's posted, so you know exactly what your job's offering you. But for employers as well, it's really good in terms of finding you people that work really well within the system of your job, and players for your team that fit the criteria that you're looking for. So overall, listeners of this show can get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at indeed.com/locked on. So just go to indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Again, indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply, but if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th again. So get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker dealer. But visit robinhood.com/boost. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about some more defensemen here that are pretty interesting in comparison. I think you could start off here with two defensemen that play on the same team, one of which we often see above the other, but we both have them flipped around, right? Talk me through Alphonse Frey and Leo Sahlin Wallenius, how they play, what they look like on the ice, and how they compare overall.
For sure. These are two left shot defensemen that play with the Vahwa J20 team in Sweden. And they are both hyper mobile and really fun offensive defensemen. But that's kind of where that comparison ends between the two. Sahlin Wallenius is very much leaning offensively. He does the offensive part of the game far better than everything else in his toolkit. He can be quite daring in the offensive zone, really wanting to activate and get pucks towards the slot. But it's still a work in progress of learning how to assess risks for him, where it happens quite regularly where Vahua gets caught with an odd man rush against because Sahlin Wallenius makes a mistake and gives up possession deep in the offensive zone. And his defensive game is raw, to say the least. It's been in certain viewings, you see him using his impressive mobility to match footwork really well off the rush and to keep a tighter gap. But those are few and far between in most viewings I've caught. He's been quite passive in his transition defending, and on the cycle, he can be a bit lost, especially when he's assigned to clearing the net front. That is not a strength of his. Whereas Alfons Freij, who is also a little bit bigger. He's listed at 6'1", 187, which seems a little bit generous to what he looks like on the ice.
Oh, for sure.
Whereas Sahlin Wallenius is listed at what he does look like, which is 5'11" and 168. So Freij is hypermobile as well. He's an excellent skater in all four directions, and he's able to use that as a high-end tool in every single facet of the game that I can see. In offensive transition, he consistently quarterbacks the rush. He loves taking the puck with it on a stick and bombing through the defensive zone into the neutral zone, switching lanes, really shifting the angle of attack in order to create space for his teammates and to find holes in defensive structures. In the offensive zone, he's really dynamic, but is also quite aware of the risks that he does take, and he's always in a position where he can get back in time in order to cover defensively if possession is lost. So, and the most impressive thing with him offensively is just his rate of creating chances through his passing and his playmaking game. He is constantly throwing pucks towards the slot, and his passing game is really, really accurate. Like, Sahlin Wallenius has a similar level of dare in his game offensively to Alfons Freij, but the success rate is just not even close. And Freij dominates shifts on a regular basis at the J20 level. And even defensively, he uses his skating really well to match footwork. And while he can be a bit more, he could used to be a bit more aggressive in defending the rush. On the cycle, he really, really pounces as soon as he sees a forward that is like bobbling the puck or anything and it's within his radius. He strikes immediately. He has really quick reactions. He's very cerebral, very intelligent, really creative. And he's a player that has solidified himself inside my personal top 10. And it was a player that I got into our top 10 of our midterm rankings at Dobber Prospects, which I was very, very happy about because he has steadily improved this season. And every viewing I've had has just been like, oh my God, I had high expectations, but not this high.
Yeah.
And that consistent basis of being like awestruck by some of the things he can do on the ice is awesome. And he's far from like a complete player. Like he has a lot of these strengths that are amazing, but he's going to have to continue to learn to put them all together into one cohesive package in the next 2 to 3 years before he's ready to make the jump to the NHL. But when he does, I think it's going to be very entertaining.
For sure. You said top 10 though. I think it's top 20, right?
Top 20. Whoa.
Yeah.
In my heart, top 10 perhaps, but no. On my board, he's at 17th on my board and at 18th on our Dobber list. So yes, top 20. There's an important distinction there.
For sure. But let's leave the top 20. Talk about some kind of late first, early second, maybe up to mid second round prospects. I want to talk about Charlie Elick and Tarin Smith. With Charlie Elick, I mean, we're talking about a player who is massive at 6'3", 200 pounds already as an 18-year-old. He plays a very in-your-face style, both on and off the puck. He's the type of right-handed defenseman who will consistently push the pace, but is also comfortable making the simple plays. And that's the thing that makes him stand out from Tarin Smith to me is Charlie Elick is very much he's capable of picking up the pace, making some pretty outlandish plays when he needs to, but most of the time he'll stick to his guns, make the right play, make the simple play, the good outlet pass, and kind of keep it there. He plays for Brandon in the WHL, and most of what I've watched from him has been pretty. I mean, it's pretty meat and potatoes until he decides that he wants to throw a Michelin star dish in there. Like he'll very much be able to pull out the flashy move or interesting deke from the blue line, but most of the time he does default to shooting. And I think the defensive game is solid in terms of what he does with his tools, but not as much with his decision making. But I think that can be polished over time with Elick. Like there are flashes of interesting decisions on the puck that make him pretty interesting. Meanwhile, with Tarin Smith, you've got a very chaotic left-handed defenseman. He's a bit smaller at 6'1", 176-ish. And yeah, I think that with Smith, you're getting a player who consistently tries to push the pace, who consistently tries to get around opponents and do outlandish things with the puck. So it's definitely less of a safe bet than Charlie Elick, which is why I think that Elick is almost definitely going to be picked first between the two. And I'd even say Elick is probably going to be a first rounder, given the style of player he is and the type of picks that contenders usually go through. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets picked between 25 and 32. Like that's a realistic possibility with Elick. But Smith, I think, has decent upside. I think he's got the qualities that you look for in a player who does take risks. He's definitely the type of player who takes calculated risks. I think his risk assessment is better than Carter Yakemchuk's. Even if Carter Yakemchuk's almost definitely going to be a top 15 prospect, and it's mainly because he has better tools than Tarin Smith. I think that they play similarly chaotic games, and with Smith, you've got a player whose risk assessment is more spot on than Yakemchuk's, but you have a lot more to work on tools wise. He's a decent skater, but not overwhelmingly good. Um, he's a decent stick handler, but again, it's not overwhelming on that end as well. The shot is pretty subpar. So there's a lot more to work on in terms of tools, but I really, really like the risk assessment for Smith, especially given the style of play that he tries to play. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll talk about some more defensemen here in our third segment. We'll talk about a personal favorite of Sebastian's, Dominik Badinka, a player I've kind of warmed up on in Artyom Levshunov, and we'll also talk about a couple more prospects after these messages from our sponsors over at GameTime. If you're looking to buy tickets to any event, whether that's sports, theater, comedy, or whatever else requires tickets, GameTime is the best place to secure, especially last-minute tickets. GameTime is a great source for tickets that are available up until the last minute before the event, and sometimes even an hour after they start. You can still find tickets on GameTime, and they're obsessed with saving you money. They've got a bunch of different deals available to you, but my favorite are zone deals. Basically, you pick the section, and GameTime picks the seat. And that gives you about 18% savings, according to Game Time data. And the Game Time guarantee makes sure that if you find a ticket in the same section and row for less than what Game Time has to offer, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Now, the Game Time app, create an account and use code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. Create an account, redeem the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to our final segment, we'll talk about a couple of really interesting players. And I think we could start with the two right-handed defensemen at the beginning here with Dominik Badinka and Artyom Levshunov. Start me off on Badinka because I know you have a lot to say about him, and I've liked the viewings I've watched of him recently. So take it away.
For sure. Badinka has the profile of player that NHL teams go feral over come draft day. So I'm expecting him to really rise up most rankings in the coming months. He's been playing a lot of minutes in the SHL in the last couple months. And that's been very impressive with just how comfortable he seemed at that level. And he's a 6'2", 185-pound right shot defenseman. He's a very, very smooth skater, quite physical, not at all afraid of being violent or using his body to smother out a transition attempt for the other team. And one of the things that I respect a lot in his game is his level of composure. He's a really, really solid passer in transition, even against really intense forechecking at the SHL level. He remains composed, always has a simple option in his back pocket that he can take when he gets pressured, and when he has some time and space, he can really, really pass the puck in the breakout. He's a really solid tape-to-tape passer. often going like with his stretch passes going from behind his goal line all the way into the neutral zone, and really launching counterattacks quite effectively. He's a lot less effective in transition as a puck handler or puck carrier. His handling ability is a real limiting factor, but he's really intelligent defensively, consistently well positioned in his own zone. His offensive game's very simple. He's a distributor. He just gets the puck to players that can do a lot with it, and he shoots sometimes, but it's usually pretty low danger from around the point. But he times it decently well with potential tips or screens. He's not a low calorie shooter. When he does it, there's an idea behind it consistently, and I like how refined his game is. I like that he's very cerebral in his decision making, and the fact that he's been so composed and consistent at the SHL level as a draft eligible defenseman, which you don't see every year. So he's really stood out in my viewing so far.
Oh, for sure. That's one thing I've really liked. Like you mentioned, like he's a player who he doesn't default to the simple pass. He keeps it in his back pocket as a secondary option, and the first option he's trying to look for is a stretch pass, is a pass through a layer, that kind of thing. I think the hands still need work, but like I said, this is the type of profile that NHL teams love. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's picked up in the first round. But one player who's almost definitely going to be gone by 5 is Artyom Levshunov. He's been playing in Michigan State right now in the NCAA. He's up over a point per game as a draft eligible defenseman. He's really decently sized. He's massive on the ice. He's listed at 6'298 pounds, which seems about right. And yeah, I mean, right-handed defensemen like him who move so well, who have this fluid stride, really great crossovers, a deep stride that helps him build speed really well in transition. Combine that with the constant desire to join offensive rushes, to get involved offensively. The passing's really good. The shot is powerful. The hands are really decent as well when he gets involved in those transitions. So the offensive tools are really interesting. And at the start of the year, was a bit more sour on his decision making. I thought this was, oftentimes I would watch this player and see a player who pretty consistently makes mistakes. But as the year's gone on, it's been very clear that this is a player who learns quick, because we're talking about a player who not even a year and a half ago was playing under 16 in Belarus. Like, that's not a level that makes you think. Now that he's in the NCAA and kind of playing straight there, I think there's been a really decent progression in his ability to consistently make good decisions. And on top of that, he's gotten a bit more conservative defensively, which has helped his game a lot, because this is a player who covers a lot of ice, who's big, who's strong, who's mean, and who's really fast. So when you have a player like that who's comfortable, getting a bit more comfortable sitting back and making defensive plays, we've seen a bit more of what he can do defensively. So he's gone from a player who was outside of the top 10 for me to a player who's well within it. And I'd say even, it's getting closer to 6 than to where he is right now in my rankings at 9. So he's a player that I've grown to love a lot. And overall, like, this is a type of profile, like you said, big right-handed defenseman who can move the puck, who can hit, who can defend.
Yeah.
Teams love this. I'd be surprised if he's still available at like 4th overall. Like, this is exactly the type of player I'd see an NHL team jump on quick. But let's end things off with a couple of defensemen here. Talk me through Matvei Shuravin, because I think that both of us have soured pretty decently on him. Like, there are some issues there, right?
There's certainly issues. He's a fascinating case study. He is playing some minutes in the KHL this season. He's played a lot in the MHL as well. And one thing that's been very consistent both in the MHL and the KHL for him is that he's quite decent in both the offensive zone and the defensive zone, but everything that has to do with like offensive transition is an absolute black hole with him.
Yep.
So he can defend the rush really well. He's actually quite effective at preventing entries at the KHL level. Even he's a decent skater. He's like 6'2", 180-ish pounds. Decent enough profile as a whole as a left shot defenseman, but and his in zone defending is decent and solid. Like he's focused on protecting the slot. He does the simple things quite well. He can clear the net front, but as soon as the puck's on his stick, it all kind of falls apart with him.
Yeah.
So he really lacks on puck composure. That's part of my biggest critique in his game. Very much deer in the headlights, goes puck off the glass regularly, just gifts away possession under a tinge of pressure, which makes him difficult to play at the KHL level. And it's not exactly the biggest forechecking league in the world, but even there, the forechecking is overwhelming for Shuravin.
Yeah.
So the on-puck game is giving me a lot of pause in terms of just what his upside could be at the NHL level, because the breakout is so important for modern NHL defensemen to be effective in. But because he is such a decent off-puck defender and rush defender specifically, and his offensive zone distribution abilities are decent, he's going to get picked likely like third, fourth round maybe. That's where I'd personally be comfortable taking a swing. But there's a lot of risk with his on-puck game specifically.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, just a player who doesn't handle pressure well at all. But speaking of which, Henry Mews is a player we've both watched a decent amount.
Yeah.
I like the fluidity. I like the offensive game. I like the way that he switches lanes and transition when he gets involved. Like, he doesn't really. You see that a lot with defensemen, where they're just rushing down one lane and they don't understand that. Like, listen, there's a lane right beside you. You can just sidestep a player and like you've got an open lane,
Yeah.
right? Muse gets that. Defensively, there are some concerns. I think he's another player who doesn't really handle pressure all that well in his own zone either. But yeah, overall, I mean, we're talking about a player who is, in your draft year, you will have issues, you will have warts. I think that Mew's offensive game and his understanding of offensive transitions is really interesting and can
Yeah.
develop into something really fun, which is why I have him in my top 25. But yeah, having logged like 40 live viewings of him, anything else you'd like to add?
You hit the nail on the head there mainly. Like I think that with Muse, the really interesting thing is the toolkit, and
Yeah,
as you mentioned, the mental adaptability to situations. Like, he's constantly surveying the ice and looking for ways, like complex ways of solving seemingly simple problems,
yeah,
which is something that I certainly appreciate in his game. He's always looking to go against the grain, trying to create space for himself in those more creative ways.
yeah.
And his tools are very, very strong. He's an excellent skater in all four directions, really, really good puck handler, very, very strong playmaker. And while his shot isn't individually very lethal, he gets himself to high danger scoring areas all the time. The shots he takes are almost exclusively from the high to mid slot. He's always getting really, really deep into the offensive zone before he's trying to give away possession with a shot. So
Yeah,
he's really cerebral in that sense. And the Ottawa system is one that we saw with Pavel Mintyukov last season really reins in the offensive defenseman, does not really like encourage them to be like super, super risky in their play,
yeah,
but allows them to kind of learn how to merge high-end tools with more NHL style roles and
yeah.
risk assessments. And that has allowed Mintyukov to translate to the NHL really, really smoothly.
Mhm.
And with Henry Muse, I have a sneaking suspicion that there might be a similar like D+1, D+2 like glow up with him,
Yeah,
where if he's in a situation where he is encouraged to be more aggressive and be more daring, that he has all the tools he needs to in order to do that well. And that's also why I have him in my top 25 as well, just like you.
for sure. Speaking of which, we forgot to mention Sherevin is about an average sized left-handed defenseman, and Henry Muse I think is what 6 foot 180 right-handed defenseman, something like that. But
He's not the tallest, but he's decently solidly
yeah,
built, but he's not physical at all. Like, he's really
for
like, he's
sure,
not a hitter in any way, shape, or form. Like, he's
for sure.
really passive, especially defending the rush. He does not get involved physically much at all.
For sure. But yeah, they're pretty interesting profiles of players we wanted to highlight as well based on recent viewings. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you think about the episode and what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please rate and review. It helps the channel out a lot, especially on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. Make sure to tune in for our next show as we continue our scouting notebook. This has been Hattie Kalikesh and Sebastian High. We hope you tune in next time.